Welcome back to Xiaol.x. Today we're opening the show with a puzzle we built for the podcast, one that sits at the heart of a huge shift in AI. This graphic behind me maps the leap from pre-inflection models to an era defined by massive datasets and the release of the O1 model. It's where emergent capabilities, complex reasoning frameworks...
This statistic is insane. In just a week, the average AI request grew by 400%. Why? Developers are no longer sending a polite paragraph. They're dumping entire codebases, configs, and logs for the model to chew through.
We used to send AIs a tiny paragraph and hope for the best. Now, there's a better way. It's called agentic inference. Instead of a sentence, developers drop in the whole codebase and logs, 4 times the context. The model reads everything, reasons on its own, and returns a plan in seconds. Think paper airplane versus a fleet.
Here's a quick look at the main innovations reshaping open models this year. Number 1, a paradigm shift to reasoning. Systems now deliberate in multi-step chains instead of single-pass pattern matching. 2, the glass slipper effect. Developers are finding perfect model, market fit, driving unprecedented retention.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going past all the theory and all the potential, and we're taking a direct look at what people are actually doing with large language models.
Right.
And our source material for this is just astonishing. It's an empirical study from OpenRouter that analyzed, get this, over 100 trillion tokens of real-world LLM interactions.
It's an incredible data set. It spans about a year of activity right up to November 2025.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We're not here to talk about benchmarks or, the marketing claims. We want to extract the concrete data-driven clues. We're going to follow the main clues in this behavioral data to see how people actually use these things.
And that timeline is so important. It's not arbitrary at all. This whole study reflects what we call the post-inflection point era.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, if you think back to December 5th, 2024, that was the release of O1. It was really the first reasoning model that got wide adoption. Before that, LLMs were basically very sophisticated pattern generators.
Just predicting the next word.
Exactly, just predicting the next word. But the O1 release shifted the whole field to what's now called multi-step deliberation inference. It meant models could, stop, think, sketch out a plan, even check their own work, and then give you the answer.
So we're talking about the difference between a student just reciting a memorized fact versus an engineer actually designing a complex system.
That's the perfect analogy. And this data we're looking at reflects a market where that kind of internal reasoning, it's now an expected capability. It's not some novel feature anymore.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're moving from prediction engines to analytical partners. We're looking for the insights that defy what everyone in the boardroom thought was going to happen. So let's start with the big picture. The balance of power, in the ecosystem.
Right. So the proprietary models, the big North American providers, they still have the largest average share. It's a pretty durable 70% of the weekly token volume.
70%. Okay, so they're still on top.
They are, but that's not the whole story. Open source software, or OSS models, they've grown really steadily to an equilibrium of about 30%. The key question is, who's driving that 30%?
Yeah.
And it's a global power shift. It's happening fast. The main growth driver here is the rapid uptake of Chinese-developed models. We're talking specifically about players like Qwen and DeepSeek.
And how fast are we talking?
Well, they started from a basically negligible share, something like 1.2% in late 2024. But by the middle of 2025, they were pulling in nearly 30% of total usage in some weeks.
Wow, 30%. That is an immense jump. So are they just replacing the proprietary models, or are they actually, expanding the whole market?
It's a bit of both, but that speed really just reflects their incredibly rapid iteration. The quality is now globally competitive. They're not just the cheap option anymore. They're a legitimate, high-quality choice for very specific domains.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. But this is where we find our first big clue, one that just completely confounds that whole productivity-first narrative. Clue number 1, the primary use case. What is the single biggest category for those OSS models making up that 30%?
It's not what you'd think. It's not coding. It's not summarization. It's creative roleplay.
Creative roleplay.
That's the stunning truth from the data. Roleplay accounts for over 50% of all OSS token usage. Programming is second, sure, but that creative, immersive dialogue, it is the volume leader for the open community by a mile.
Okay, so why? Why is half of this really vibrant open source market dedicated to, making up fictional worlds and talking to imaginary characters? It seems to fly in the face of all the pressure to use these things for, I don't know, spreadsheets and email drafts.
Well, it really comes down to flexibility and constraints. We talked about this a bit earlier. Proprietary models, they're built like these beautiful but very heavily moderated libraries.
Right, safe and reliable.
Safe, reliable, but every book is exactly where the library wants it. OSS models, though, they're more like a blank studio. If you're fine-tuning a model for a very specific fictional persona or some complex storytelling, those commercial safety layers, they often just become walls.
They get in the way of the creativity.
They get in the way. The open models just offer so much more creative freedom and depth.
So the community decided that the best use for all this unrestricted power is pure collaborative creativity. That's a fascinating insight into how we interact with AI.
And all that creative volume, it's actually driving the evolution of the models themselves. We're seeing the market move very quickly past those really small models, the ones under 15 billion parameters.
They just can't handle it.
They just don't have enough reasoning capability for what people want to do in 2025. Instead, what we're calling the medium market, so that's between 15 and 70 billion parameters, that's where we're really seeing what you could call model market fit.
Finding the sweet spot.
Exactly. Models like Qwen 2.5, Coder 32B really establish this category. They just strike a fantastic balance between high capability enough reasoning to handle complex tasks and, being efficient to run.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, I think. We've talked about what people are doing, role play and programming.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about how the models are being used. We're seeing this exponential rise of agentic inference.
Yes. This is the big shift. Models are stopping being just, single-turn completion engines. They're starting to plan and reason and execute these complex multi-step workflows.
And we can actually see this in the data.
Oh, yeah. We can quantify it with three different proxies from the usage data. First, just the core infrastructure is changing. The share of tokens being routed through reasoning-optimized models, it's shot up. It's now over 50%.
So more than half the traffic is going to models built to think.
Built to think, yeah. Models like Grok Code Fast 1 or Gemini 2.5 Pro, they're handling the majority of the volume now.
Okay, what's the second proxy?
Second is tool use. We're seeing this consistent upward adoption of tool use. That's where the model explicitly calls an external function.
Like using a search engine or a calculator.
Exactly. Or running a code interpreter. And this behavior is really concentrated in the models built for it, like Anthropic's Claude 4.5 Sonnet. The model just knows when it needs help.
And the third one, you said this one was visceral.
Yeah, the third one is just the physical shape of the interaction has changed dramatically. The average number of prompt tokens per request has grown about fourfold.
Fourfold? From what to what?
From about 1,500 tokens to over 6,000. And completions have almost tripled, so people aren't sending a paragraph anymore. They're feeding these models huge amounts of context, code, logs, everything.
That fourfold growth that has to be the signature of these models being used as analytical partners, not just text helpers. Which brings us to our next clue, clue number 2, the driver of complexity. Where is all that input token growth coming from?
It is not spread evenly, not at all. Programming is the dominant defining driver. Hands down.
So it's the developers.
It's the developers. Programming queries are routinely exceeding 20,000 input tokens. They average 3 to 4 times the length of a general-purpose prompt.
And what does that look like? I mean, what is a developer putting into a 20,000 token prompt?
Think about it. They are feeding the LLM an entire chunk of a code base, maybe the documentation, a list of dependencies, a detailed debugging log. They might even be asking it to simulate steps in a deployment pipeline.
So that is not a simple question. That's not write me a function.
No. That is a sophisticated agent-like workflow. It's embedded right into the software development process. The LLM is expected to synthesize, to troubleshoot, and to plan a multi-step solution across this huge knowledge base. Agentic inference is becoming the default.
All right, let's shift gears now to user loyalty, retention. Because if these models really are solving these huge problems, people should stick with them. And the data here shows something you've called the Cinderella glass slipper effect.
It's a perfect analogy, really. The Cinderella glass slipper effect is what happens when a very specific high-value workload achieves a perfect workload model fit.
The shoe just fits.
The shoe fits perfectly.
Right.
And it leads to this incredibly persistent retention, this lock-in, that is just the true fingerprint of real technical progress. When a developer team finds that one model that works perfectly for their very specific, maybe even kind of weird, high-stakes workflow, they're locked in forever.
Can you give us an example?
Absolutely. If you look at the June 2025 cohort for Gemini 2.5 Pro or the May 2025 cohort for Claude 4 Sonnet, they retained about 40% of their users 5 months later.
Which is high.
That's dramatically higher than the industry average. These are the early adopters who found a real solution to a complex, previously intractable problem, and they just stayed put.
And contrast that with something like the GPT-4o mini launch.
Right, that was fascinating. A single, dominant, very sticky cohort formed right at the launch in July 2024. But every single group that came after that initial one, they churned, quickly and identically. It suggests that frontier window, the time when a model is uniquely the best tool for the job, it can be incredibly brief.
So this all proves that people are willing to pay for capability.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the money. You would assume, in a race to the bottom on price, that when cost drops, demand just soars.
Right, that's the classic assumption.
But the data shows an extremely weak correlation between price and demand.
It's so weak. The price elasticity is very low. A 10% price decrease only yields about a 0.5 to 0.7% increase in usage. That is astonishingly inelastic.
So what does that tell us?
It confirms that users are not just flocking to the cheapest thing. If a model solves your problem, you will pay the price. If it doesn't solve your problem, you won't use it, even if it's free.
Which is the perfect lead-in to our third clue. Clue number 3. The market is highly segmented. And the study found 4 clear archetypes here.
That's right. First, you've got the mass market volume drivers. This is where you find enormous usage, but at a low median cost, around 73 cents per million tokens.
And this is dominated by
the 2 categories we already identified, roleplay and programming, which you could call the killer professional category, just sheer scale.
Okay, then you have the efficient giants.
Yep. These are open models like DeepSeek V3. They pair really strong performance with very low prices, around 39 cents per million tokens, and they just absorb all the cost-sensitive but high-volume work.
And then on the other end of the spectrum,
you find the premium leaders. Think of Anthropic's Claude 3.7 Sonnet. They're priced highly, almost $2 per million tokens, but they maintain very high usage. It just confirms that people will pay a serious premium for quality and reliability. They're paying for trust.
But the biggest surprise in this segmentation was in the premium workloads segment, right? Mm-hmm. The category called technology.
That is the critical detail, the technology workload category. So this is complex system architecture, advanced problem solving, specialized data analysis. It commands the highest cost per token by a huge margin.
And yet usage is still high.
Still high. It suggests a massive willingness to pay, basically regardless of price. Because for those queries, you need the absolute best, most expensive frontier models. But the value you get from it, it just justifies that price tag.
So before we wrap up, let's just touch on how global this whole thing is becoming.
Right. It's really shedding its North American bias. Asia's share of global spend more than doubled over the year. It's at about 31% now, driven mostly by enterprise adoption and innovation.
And what about language?
English still dominates, of course, about 83% of tokens. But simplified Chinese is the largest non-English language now, at almost 5%, which, directly reflects the strength of those Chinese OSS models we talked about, like Qwen and DeepSeek.
So let's summarize the main clues we followed today. What does this all mean for you, whether you're a user or a builder?
Well, first, it's clear we are in a multi-model, pluralistic ecosystem. It's about integration, not one model to rule them all.
Second, agentic inference, that ability to plan and act, is quickly becoming the default mode for any serious workload.
And finally, the highest volume is split between 2 extremes, really complex code and deeply immersive creative use.
And remember the glass slipper. Deep, persistent retention is the true sign of technical progress.
Exactly. The market has absolutely not commoditized. Quality, unique capabilities, and trust. They still trump cost, which forces providers to keep finding ways to differentiate themselves.
So we'll leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Since users are so clearly willing to pay high prices for reliable outcomes, we saw this with the expensive Anthropic models in that technology segment, the industry is really moving away from focusing on the cost per token.
And moving towards what?
Towards optimizing for the cost per successful outcome. The price of failure on these complex tasks is just too high.
So if LLMs are now defined by their ability to complete these complex tasks, not just generate text, which of your current workflows could benefit from this new level of robust agentic inference? What problem which you're working on right now is just waiting for its glass slipper solution? Think about that until our next deep dive.